Modernism is a philosophical and art movement that take place because of that idea that people thought that earlier aspects of tradition that was very limiting in its ways. So this modernism is essentially post-Darwinian. Post-Darwinian because it believes in evolution, because it believes in changing the course, it believes in learning new things. So it is essentially post-Darwinian concept. Modernism is a search to explain mankind's place in the modern world. So as we are looking at, T.S. Eliot talking about fragments, talking about this world as a wasteland. We have Yeats talking about this world, which is looking at a second coming. So likewise, other people also who will be anti-establishment, they are also looking at mankind's place in this modern world. So this is how modernism evolves. Religion, social stability, and ethics are all called into question. Obviously, we cannot forget that 60 million people had died in the Second World War. We cannot forget that so many people had personal vehicle. We cannot forget that now people are aware of their consciousness and unconsciousness. So because of all these knowledge, because of all these things, now religion, social stability, and ethics, they're all called into question, as we see that earlier ideas, they were called into questions in mathematics, in philosophy, in sociology, in all other terms. Modernism questioned the certainties and had supported traditional modes of social organization, religion, and morality. It questioned traditional ways of conceiving the human self under the influence of Nietzsche, who talks about God is dead, and Karl Marx, who obviously he talks about the labors. He talks about the labor movement and the labor the world unite, and philosophy which needs to change the world rather than interpret it. We have Freud's influence, obviously, because he talks about a stream of consciousness, he talks about ego, superego, and Fraser, who gives the idea of the golden bough. The working of the unconscious mind became an important subject because that was an area of interrogation, of knowing more than what you are aware of. So that was an important subject, in modernism. And therefore, stream of consciousness, how our consciousness works, how it moves from one idea to the other to the next, in terms of stream, which is fluid. So consciousness is not a very rigid idea. It's a fluid idea. It's a stream of consciousness that we are looking at now. So this is how, roughly, I would introduce modernism to you. Certain features are that it is very experimental, as it is breaking free from the traditional model. So it is experimenting with new forms. It is formally very complex. We look at a few ideas, how they are very complex, because the earlier forms of realism or earlier forms of portrayal, which was simplified, was not able to portray reality, was not able to portray various ideas. Therefore, when it is talking about complex ideas, formally it becomes a very complex. The form of the art becomes very complex. Artists' freedom from realism, materialism, and traditional genres and form can be seen in modernism. That the artist is being free from realism, materialism, traditional genres, and form, and all the topics, including theater of cruelty, theater of the absurd, beat literature. They all are actually seeking freedom from realism, materialism, and traditional genres and form. It recognizes the fragments. Now, this is something which is very crucial, especially when you are looking at modernism and postmodernism together, because this is the time period when there is recognition of fragments. Now, these fragments can be seen as a wasteland. These fragments can be seen as looking for, a second coming. But these fragments are also acknowledged. So when they are acknowledged or celebrated, This is the aspect of postmodernism, but when they are acknowledged and mourned about, there is a concept of modernism. So modernism, mourns at these fragments, and postmodernism celebrates these fragments. But nevertheless, there is recognition of fragments in this time period, in this particular way of looking at reality. This experiments with new forms. There is no hesitation in breaking free from the old forms and genres, and modernism, therefore, experiments with new forms. Avant-garde is advanced garde. This is a very prominent feature of modernism. As I said, that traditional forms were now being broken, and the people wanted to be free from them. So now we are looking at a new movement, avant-garde movement, that is experimentation in literary forms, and Ezra Pound defines it as to make it new. So everything was now redefined, or it was something which was re-established or de-established with art forms. So everything was being made into new, be it theater, be it poetry, be it painting, be it architecture. So everywhere we are looking at changes, we are looking at this tendency to make it new by violating the accepted conventions and properties, not only in art but also in uh, the larger discourses, in the social discourses, which includes marriage, which includes family, which includes various other ways of reality. I mean, this was a time period when so many women decided to, on the one hand we had the suffragette movements, on the other hand there were women who were deciding against jobs, and they were sitting back at home. They were they wanted to become housewives again. So there's recognition of these tendencies, and we can see that this modernism recognizes it. Avant-garde movement especially talks about all these social discourses. That includes the concept of marriage, that includes the concept of job, that includes the concept of society, community, love relation, and sexuality. So all these social discourses, they were violated. So why was it done? Because the artists, they set out, it said the modern avant-garde, it set out to create ever new artistic forms and styles in order to do two things. One is to introduce the neglected subject, and the other one is to introduce the forbidden subject. So there's a difference between neglected subject and forbidden subject. Neglected subjects like Black people, neglected subjects like laborers, but they're not forbidden subjects. They're ignored because they're not important enough. And on the other hand, we had forbidden subjects such as taboo of sexuality, homosexuality, and other things. So avant-garde movement, talks about these ideas, both neglected subject as well as forbidden subjects. The avant-garde artists represent themselves as alienated from the established order. So in order to show themselves alienated from the established order, we can see that these people, the artists who belong to the avant-garde movement, they at times become very violent, very radical. At times they show their anger also on pages and on the canvas. So we see that they are trying to show that whatever they are, but they are absolutely, they do not belong to the established order. And they try to change their way of representation in order to shock the audience. Because if we are following certain order for a long time and we want to establish new order, so we have to shake the audience. We have to first, awake them, make them wake up from their, that zone where everything, all social norms, they have become a part of their habit. Realism has become a part of their habit. So now the main aim was to shock the audience in this avant-garde movement. So it was to challenge the norms and pieties of the dominant bourgeois culture. Why it is in different color? Because this is what was represented in realism, and therefore anti-realistic movement took place. So it was to challenge the norm and practice of dominant bourgeois culture. It was the culture which was being talked about when we were talking about Victorian morality. It was the culture which was being talked about when we were previously talking about the neoclassical culture. So in every age, it was a dominant bourgeois culture that forms and formulates the understanding of reality. So now reality was forcing itself from different directions, and therefore it was necessary for certain artists to challenge the norms and pieties of the dominant bourgeois culture. So what is realism? Now we come to that idea. Realism, in a very rough way, we can say that it's a mirror to reality. But when we are talking about mirror to reality, it becomes very important to understand who is holding the mirror and whose reality it is being it is shown. Which depends entirely on whose reality gets represented. So it is a mirror to reality, but whose reality? How far? What is it the establishment of what is acceptable as reality, or is it reality itself? So does it talk about women's reality? Does it talks about gays reality? Does it talk about black people's reality? So realism is a representation of dominant bourgeois culture. Therefore, it was a representation of accepted and acceptable order. We know we have this tendency to talk about accepted order, but what is acceptable and how that idea has become acceptable, that is something which has to be talked about. So why was it to be rejected? Okay, so there was this established order. We had this very beautiful paintings, very realistic art genres that were there in the Victorian era. Why was there a need to reject it? Were we looking for alternatives? That is the idea. So George W. Brandt, in his book on modern theories of drama, talks about it that no sooner had realism in some form or other apparently conquered the stage in the final years of the 19th century than a counter movement set in. Much of this was a displaced religious emotion in search of secular outlet. So this was the major idea, because we're displacing religious emotion and we're looking for secular outlet. And therefore, anti-realism was established. As soon as realism was there, it was there on the stage, we had a counter movement in terms of avant-garde that we can see in terms of anti-realism. So these are the art movements. I will not talk about these movements. Fauvism is an art form in painting where we use direct colors on the canvas, from the tube itself. So it is very wild or very bold colors which are used. So we have different paintings in Fauvism, which are where a girl is there. A girl with a hat is a famous painting. So a girl is there, but the colors which are used, they're very bold and bright, so directly used from the cube, which is to shock the audience, because it is not at all realistic, but it is talking about various other things. So anger can get a color, very abstract ideas can get a color. Cubism, where it used geometrical shapes. Futurism is talking about scientific developments. Then we have Dadaism, Surrealism, propaganda, and many other art movements that took place in this century.